Okay, great.
Okay, excellent. So good morning, everybody. So those of you who have been around FaceBase for some time know that I usually talk about distant acting enhancers and craniofacial development and mouse experiments and so on. But thankfully, Justin already covered all of that yesterday, so I will not talk about that at all today, but instead I will talk about the main topic of this meeting for once, which is data science. So as Yang already mentioned, I've been leading an effort with NIDCR for the past 2.5 years to help develop a vision for data science for NIDCR. And so what I'll do is I'll revisit and expand on many of the themes that we already heard about yesterday. And it's kind of backwards, because a lot of the things that we kind of found and recommended, you already see being implemented right now in efforts that go on at NIDCR, and that you see implemented at FaceBase now in the latest iteration. But I think it's worth looking at this in some more detail to understand better where this is coming from and what the continuous focus areas moving forward are. So let's see. This does not work. Okay, wonderful. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll start off with some general thoughts about data science and how it's changing the way we do science. I will then talk a bit about the work of the data science strategy working group that we've had starting in late 2022 and concluded last year. Our findings related to the current dental, oral, craniofacial data ecosystem, challenges and opportunities that we identified, and then some of the specific recommendations that the working group made to NIDCR for developing the strategy moving forward. And then I will also, in the last few minutes, briefly highlight some more details about the DDS Hub, which is a new initiative that Jennifer already mentioned in her introduction yesterday. So data science. I want to start off by reminding you about the dramatic changes that we've seen just in the past 15 years. So we heard yesterday in the introduction that FaceBase started in 2009. So I would be just about here. And so in the past 15 years, during the existence of FaceBase, the total amount of data that humans have produced that exists has increased by a factor of about, see the pointer?
Yeah.
Okay. So it has increased by about a factor of 100, right? So we start here 2, here we are close to 200. Now the unit here, like the scale, this is zettabyte. So this is a very large number. These are 21 zeros. So that's a large number. But the point being that we see this exponential increase. And now this is all data that humans have produced. Scientific data is only a subset of that, but the same exponential dynamic is something that we keep seeing in science, and it will only continue. Something that we've seen along with this is the concept of data science, which has been around for a longer time, but it really has taken off in the last few years as its own discipline. And that you can now look at any newspaper and you will see a lot of discussion about machine learning and artificial intelligence. Most of you will probably have played around with large language models like ChatGPT for entertainment purposes, or they've used generative AI for making images. It's not very good at counting fingers, as you can see here. You can read it. It's also not very good at other things. But something that has become clear is that beyond this fun stuff, there are very serious applications in science around this, right? So I think one of the first big moments for this was about 4 years ago when AlphaFold came out, right? I think this was the first really major thing that made the news, that solved the long-standing dream of structural biologists to be able to predict reasonably well, not perfectly, but reasonably well, what proteins look like in 3D just from their sequence. And so this was, of course, enabled in part by the very well structured data that we heard about yesterday that exists for proteins, but similar applications are now starting to emerge in other areas of science. For example, in the genomic space, we see things such as sequence foundation models and so on and so on. So what is clear that it's really transformative in science. But what I want to remind you about is that this is just one small aspect of data science. When we talk about data science, we really have to think of the entirety of everything that makes up data science, which is typically defined as the entirety of the methods, the algorithms and systems that can be used to extract insights and knowledge from data, from structured data, from unstructured data. And when we think about this in the context of the DOC science space, there are many things that we need to think about. We need to think about integrative data systems, FaceBase being a prime example of that. We need to think about ontologies, terminology, standards for things. We need to think about data access and sharing, FAIR principles, along with that AI readiness of data. We need to think about data types that are currently difficult to access, such as we heard yesterday about electronic clinical records and so on. How can we make that accessible? And we need to think about the entire data ecosystem that can be used for research and that can be used for training. Now, when we started with this in 2022, it was really driven by the recognition that when we think about NIDCR as the main funder of DOE research in the US, that data science really touches all aspects of NIDCR strategy. So this is the strategic plan that existed at the time, and it's still like the current strategic plan for NIDCR. It outlines like 5 major priorities. I will not go through them in detail, but the point that I want to make is that under all these priorities, you can find specific things that need to happen that explicitly relate to data science and building out data science. At the same time, it was kind of implicit, but there was no explicit data science strategy that NIDCR had spelled out. And so with this in mind, we were asked, and this was an effort that came out of NIDCR Council, on which I was serving at the time. The NIDCR asked us to come up or put together a data science strategy working group to begin to look at this in more detail and provide recommendations for a well-informed and well-reasoned NIDCR data science strategy, really with the goal to realize the potential of data science. And something that seemed important here is to really cover the entirety of the spectrum that NIDCR covers, which goes all the way from basic to clinical and population studies, really get the big picture and look at that. So we put together a working group. And the working group had 12 members, that you can see here. So I served as the chair, Acharya served as a co-chair, and then 10 other folks, and I'm not sure if you can read this, but they came from both academia as well as the health care space to really cover this entire spectrum. We also had multiple folks from NIDCR who were not, oops, no. Okay, who were not technically members, but served an ex officio role to really help us go in the right direction. And then also Chris was heavily involved in keeping us on track with our work. So when we picked the members of this working group, we intentionally aimed to cover the full translational spectrum of NIDCR's work. So the translational continuum is typically defined by these key levels that go from T0, which is basic research, through translation to humans, to translation into patients, translation to practice, and then translation into actual communities. You see here the 12 members with their respective areas of expertise, we being all the way over here, knowing nothing about humans or patients, only do basic research, all the way here into people who do population community studies. So when we started with this, we kind of naively thought, oh, this is easy. So let's just have a look at, what the current data ecosystem looks like that DOC researchers are using. So let's just look at the resources and what data types are in there and think about use cases, except that it turned out to be very complex. So here's an AI rendering of what our working group looked like when we started to look at this in more detail. It was pretty accurate. So it was very overwhelming. We realized that there's enormous complexity and that even though we had a lot of people on our working group already, we needed external input. So we decided to get input from the broader community just to understand what the current data ecosystem looks like. So we had community listening sessions where we brought in people from the community. And in fact, here in the room and online, I saw some people who were part of these listening sessions. We brought them together, grouped by these different T levels for listening sessions. And we also had an RFI, an official request for information that was put out there. So both of these covered very similar questions. And so I also want to thank Chris and Alicia for the help with organizing these community listening sessions, and Nafisat, who took the lead on putting together this RFI and running that from the NIDCR side. So the kinds of questions that we asked were, well, for data generators, people who generate relevant data, what kinds of data does your lab generate, and where do people currently store data? Do they store it locally, or do they upload it to repositories? For people who are users of data, what kinds of data they use, and importantly, where do they get that data? What is the source of the data? And then for people who generate data and share data, how do they do this right now? Do they use repositories? Do they share directly with collaborators? What are the mechanisms? And for those people who have data to share but currently don't, why are they not sharing it? What are the barriers to data sharing right now? We tried to get a better understanding of data standards. So what data standards do people use? Which of them are most important for people working in the DOC space? And importantly, for people who don't use standards, why are they not using standards? Are they too lazy to look them up? Do the data standards perhaps not exist for their type of data? And then we had all sorts of open-ended questions really to inform the broad directions of NIDCR and where existing repositories as well as possible new resources should develop. So this is very informative for example, for FaceBase to see what the community wants. So we got a lot of input and it took quite some effort to organize all of this. When we compiled it all, we saw that there are many, many types of data that people use. So this is a partial list here. There were more than 65 general types of data. Many of them are not one data type, but they have subtypes of data. So enormous diversity of data. We also found that people use many different data systems to get data. There was a long list, over 60 different data systems. What you see here is just letters A through F of our list, ending in FaceBase here. The list keeps going. And some of these are DOC-specific resources. Some of them are generalist systems that people use heavily, though, to get data that they then connect with DOC data or their own data. And we also heard a lot about challenges that people are currently facing in the data science space from the community. I picked out just a handful of them here. So one comes back to what I talked about earlier, the growth of data, right? And so as things keep growing, the size and complexity of data can make sharing a challenge. We heard a lot of concerns about persistence of data repositories. And I think right now in the current funding landscape, these concerns are even more severe. If there is no sustainable funding for these repositories, what will happen to the data if a repository disappears? Regarding standards, we heard from people that they would like to use standards, but there are currently no consensus standards for the type of data that they're producing. people pointed out that there is this larger NIH-wide data ecosystem. We heard about this from Susan Gregory yesterday, right? And whatever we do in the DOC space needs to integrate and connect to that. So in total, more than 100 comments were received. I will not go through all of them, but what the data science strategy group then did is like condense these all into general observations and recommendations. So let's start with some general observations. So overarching observations that we made were, first of all, the complexity and heterogeneity of the DOC data ecosystems. The DOC community is, in fact, many different subcommunities that use different repositories. These connect to various resources and other repositories. It's it looks pretty much like what I showed in the cartoon early on. It's like this amazing mesh that is too complicated to even put it on paper in reality at this point. What we also observed, and this is important to keep in mind if we think about the bigger ecosystem, is that there are fuzzy boundaries. There is not one DOC data ecosystem. There are, this is shown in this cartoon, so at the center here in red are explicitly DOC focused resources. And so, for example, FaceBase is clearly DOC focused. There are other like more clinical resources that are like that. But then there are these on the periphery, various other types of data systems. For example, NIH-wide data systems that people pull data from. They are important. They connect to some extent to these. But what we also observed is that overall, there tends to be a lack of connectivity. Now, connecting things is not an end in itself, and not all connections that can be made should be made, but there are clearly some connections that would be desirable to have that currently don't exist. Lack of dedicated resources, and so this is not so much about the lack of data resources, but the lack of funding resources to support a sustainable data ecosystem. Many of the current systems are funded out of competitive grants when those grants go away. And we're seeing this in reality right now for some systems that are funded by NIH. It's unclear what's going to happen, and that can create major problems. And then this can also create hurdles for fair compliance, findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable data. I should point out that many of these fair data standards are also what makes data AI accessible. So there's a lot of overlap. So how do we get better at this? So fortunately, like, there has already been a lot of thinking about fair data standards. I know at FaceBase it has been a topic for a long time, but there continue to be hurdles across the space. So before I go to recommendations, I want to also point out some specific opportunity areas that the working group identified. 4 major areas where there is major potential to, if strategic investments are made, to really use data science efforts. And these were in the areas of understanding oral health differences across the population, improving AI and ML readiness of data, new types of applications that can emerge from data, and then leveraging the many different types of data that are being produced by DOC researchers. So let's start with the first one. So there is of course, a recognition that, first of all, oral health is, highly correlated with overall health. And then there's also a recognition that there is a lot of heterogeneity in the population in the US in access to healthcare and access to oral healthcare, and that these two things connect. Something where data science has major potential is to really get better at understanding what drives these differences and finding ways to mitigate them. What this requires is an integration of social determinants, population data into these studies. There's also a suspicion that many of the data sets that are currently existing are not fully representative of the population overall. They tend to be biased in certain directions. And so how do we get better at understanding these biases and getting better data. What this will require is methodological enhancements, leveraging big data, integrative techniques, and then really integrating across the ecosystem, integrating in particular the basic studies with clinical and population studies, which is currently not done to the extent that would be possible, and would also require new tools to do it right. Along with this, there's a recognition that the workforce needs to develop accordingly, in particular in the space of connecting basic research with these kinds of population studies. They're currently somewhat disconnected as spaces of research. And also in looking at the workforce that is conducting these studies to make sure that we have broad representation for these population studies. Finally, this links also to AI. We know that there's a lot of literature at this point about how AI can potentially, well, depending on what kind of data you feed in, can propagate and even amplify biases that may exist in current data. So how do we make sure that these applications are robust, representative, and don't amplify such biases? And along with this comes a need for ethical guidelines to really use this AI ethically, especially when the results go into policy decisions. The second big opportunity space that was identified relates to AI and machine learning readiness of DOC data. I mentioned that many of the general principles that make data fair also improve its AI readiness. But there are some very specific aspects of this that relate in particular to the work in the DOC space. So the first one is data governance and curation. So curation is, of course, essential for data to be useful, but then when it comes in particular to clinical data, there are a lot of complexities related in particular to both IP and HIPAA compliance that need to be incorporated into any tools. And some of these are currently, because like a lot of these AI systems work like as a black box, like unsolved challenges that need to be figured out. Assurance of data quality, high quality data is critical for getting good results. As we know, data quality across the space varies widely. So there need to be robust quality metrics, and there need to be really concerted efforts to clean, normalize, label, annotate data to make it useful. Data integration is important. AI has enormous potential for integrating across different data types. But what this requires is harmonization of data. And this goes back to the idea of using consistent data standards and so on that make this possible. Scalability, what AI is great at is really working with these massive amounts of data that I talked about. But what this requires in turn is infrastructure that is actually designed to handle the volume of data that we're dealing with, and that has the processing power to actually make sense of it. And then again, related to the first one, governance and curation, there's also there are a lot of currently unsolved challenges related to data security and compliance. Again, especially when it comes to patient data, there's a need for protocols for access, encryption, anonymization that really can work in the context of AI systems. Then another big opportunity space, and I don't have time to talk about this. There's a lot of more detail about this in our working group report, but the broad range of applications that will be possible using data science. And again, we heard about some of these yesterday already with very specific examples. So I'll just remind you that there are great opportunities in imaging, diagnostic imaging, enhancing diagnostic imaging, 3D imaging for precision medicine. We heard yesterday about opportunities in analyzing clinical records, AI-supported pathology diagnosis. We can think about ways to use these data science for personalized therapeutics and generative technologies, such as like 3D design and microbiome informatics. Again, broad range of opportunities here. I will not go into detail about these. But the last one that I wanted to briefly cover is like really leveraging all types of DOC data. So I mentioned that there's like many different data types, and these offer a lot of, well, they come with some challenges in like just managing all of this, but all of these challenges, if tackled the right way, can also be opportunities. So one is to just navigate the complexity of the data that I talked about. And there's a clear opportunity that if we do it right, there are new types of studies that we can do by integrating across the different data types. Again, as an example, integrating basic with population studies. There's currently data fragmentation across the systems and repositories. If we can manage to, organize this better and improve accessibility across these systems, that would be very powerful. There's a lack of standards for data and metadata. Again, focused efforts to develop and really establish these will substantially increase our chances of integrating data in meaningful ways. There are, well, both the specialist repositories and the generalist repositories that I talked about have their own respective limitations. Again, if we can find ways to integrate across those, that can be very valuable. And then in terms of the suspected biases in available DOC data, we can use data science to, well, first of all, detect and understand the sources of these biases, which then in turn can help us to mitigate. So far, everything that I described were mostly observations, but the Data Science Strategy Working Group also developed a set of specific strategy recommendations that we synthesized from everything that we saw. And we organized them to match up with what was at the time, I think there's a new version of this now, but what was at the time the NIH strategic plan for data science, so that it's easy to get this alignment with the broader strategy. And so there were 5 specific areas where we provided recommendations. The first one was related to DOC data systems and their complex and heterogeneous nature, as well as the current lack of connectivity, the fuzzy boundaries, and the lack of dedicated resources. So one obvious recommendation is that NIDCR needs to invest in establishing robust data infrastructure tailored for DOC research and interfacing with NIH data systems. So, I mean, this is an obvious and very broad recommendation. Specifically, what this requires is finding ways to optimize data storage and security, connecting the DOC-specific systems to the general NIH data systems, right? We heard about the federated infrastructure and so on yesterday. And to push towards the ethical use of AI and ML, improving the readiness of the data infrastructure for DOC research. And again, this is something that, for example, in the case of FaceBase, we see already being turned into reality. The second set of recommendations is kind of related, but it focuses more on integration across the DOC data types and the observation of data fragmentation and the need for a more comprehensive approach for the DOC research. Essentially a call to modernize data ecosystems specific to DOC research. So this includes establishing dedicated data repository for DOC research. This could be new repositories, or it could be an expansion of the existing repositories to reflect NIH's objective. And so these are the objectives that we listed here: cost-effective, sustainable, secure, and accessible. The two that I want to highlight here is cost effectiveness, which is, of course, these days in times of challenging budgets, a particular consideration. How can we make sure that we're cost effective? And in times of uncertainty, how can we make sure that these resources are sustainable? Support for the storage, sharing of individual data sets, and beyond data, also software tools, and leveraging the already ongoing initiatives to facilitate the integration across clinical and observational data in the DOC space. The third set of recommendations focuses on tools. We heard from the community loud and clear, like, we need better tools. And so there are major opportunities to integrate and extract value, but this requires managing the differences between the repositories. So we are recommending to NIDCR to foster the development of data management, analytics, and visualization tools for DOC research. This includes the development of new generalizable tools and workflows, but it also there's also an observation that many specialized tools already exist that are hard to access. So how can we broaden access to these specialized tools? And more generally, improving the resources for discovery and cataloging. So this, again, is aligned with FAIR principles. The fourth set of recommendations relates to the workforce. So along with an expansion of this, there's a clear need to build out the workforce that can do all of this work. And this includes both building out the expertise and workforce within NIDCR, and this has already happened to some extent, but then also to develop externally a strong DOC data science research workforce that is importantly representative of the communities that it's supposed to cater to. Again, thinking about the differences that we currently see in oral health across the population, making sure that we get full participation there. And then finally, an important set of recommendations relates to stewardship. So NIDCR, as the funder, is in a particular position to really take on responsibility for stewardship for data and resources that are created under limited term funding, and making sure that these adhere with fair data principles. So the recommendation was to promote stewardship and establish robust data policies. This means that NIDCR is in a unique position to develop policies for a fair DOC data ecosystem, enhance stewardship and governance of the DOC data, and really make sure that there are aspects such as sustainability of the data, that is ensured. So this was in a nutshell the recommendations from the working group. If you're interested, there's a full report that we published. It's a very this may be too small to get, but you can just Google for NIDCR data science strategy working group or something, and you'll get to the report. This report has the full list of findings. It lists all the data types that we heard from the community. This may be useful for people who think about building repositories. The data systems that currently exist. Something that we didn't manage to do is draw out that map of how they all connect. So someone still needs to do that. And you will also find a much more detailed overview of all the community inputs that we received, as well as what I just summarized in 5 slides in terms of recommendations, much more nuance about the recommendations that we had. There is also a series of papers that we are currently preparing for publication. These will focus in particular on some of these opportunities that I just summarize briefly in one slide. So this is coming up. Again, if you're interested in that, have a look at the report. With this, the last few minutes, I want to spend on a new initiative that essentially came as a result of these recommendations, which is really strengthening resources for data science out of NIDCR. So there's this new resource, and Jennifer already talked about this briefly yesterday in her presentation, called the DDS Hub, where DDS in this case stands for Data-Driven Science Hub. This is relatively new. It was launched just in December, and this is something that was spearheaded by Vidya Mekateswaran, who's, I think, online and can answer questions about this, and Lu Wang. And so they together, like the masterminds behind this. So this is a new resource that is hosted by NIDCR at ddshub.nih.gov. The idea behind this was to generate like a central hub that provides a knowledge base that covers all these things that you see around here, from data generation, finding, curating data, managing, sharing data, analytics resources, community engagements, and funding opportunities to really cover the entire cycle of data-driven research for DOC researchers. It's aimed to follow the FAIR principles, in particular helping people to find the right resources and data sets. And similar to the work of the working group, it aims to go beyond just the basic science, but to really cover the entire spectrum of research and translation. Again, this is a relatively new resource, so they're still looking for feedback from you. So I encourage you to go there. And if you have any suggestions, just, I'm not sure if you can see this, but it says ddshub@mail.nih.gov. This is the email address into which you can provide inputs. And I'm sure Vidya would be free to get your input on this to further build this out. So just very quickly, what you can find in there is, you can find links to FAIR data, for example, highlighted data sets from then repositories, curated data, preclinical, clinical, population data. You can get help with making your own data more fair. For example, information about endorsed standard terminologies and common data elements, CDEs, guidance on use of AI, data generation, materials about informed consent for digital studies. You can find training materials such as tutorials, guidance, and best practices, in particular for data management and sharing plans. So this is something that is still relatively new to the NIH grant format. You need to develop these. Again, we heard about this yesterday from the FaceBase team, where they do this, but beyond just FaceBase, like how do you write these info about data products and so on. Training materials such as tutorials, hit links to like free cloud computing resources, support for data analysis such as adaptable workspaces and code notebooks that you can adapt, various other pointers to resources. And then this also provides a forum for community engagement. So it has a section where you can have your own activities, your data, your papers, seminars that you organize, can have them highlighted on the hub. Again, if you have anything that you want highlighted, send it to this email address for coordination. So, and funding, of course. Yeah, funding is important. So this will also, hopefully in the near future, there will be new funding opportunities. If and when they come out, those will be highlighted there. So again, a great resource for those of you for all of us working in this space. So with this, I'm at the end. I want to thank everybody who was involved in what I talked about. The members of the actual data science strategy working group, the NIDCR program staff who contributed in various roles to the work of this working group, the participants in our listening sessions, and the people who provided thoughtful input for our RFI, and Vidya and Lou, who are spearheading the DDS Hub as another resource in this space. And with that, I'll take questions.
Any questions for Axel? Any questions from our remote audience? Oh yes, Pedro.
So beautiful and so thorough and just incredible. How long do you think it would take to get to things, mitigation of ethical use of AI, like just or the data sets? if you would put a point in, where would you sit?
I would say it will never be done, because it's something like as these methods evolve, there will be new challenges that will pop up. And I think it's something that it's essentially like, the way I think of this is it's just like say when you do like say human subjects research in the clinical space, right? As methods move along, new challenges pop up, and like the what is ethical today might not be ethical tomorrow, because there's some new way how someone say might de-identify supposedly anonymous samples and so on, right? Just one example, right? And so I feel like when we think about like these biases, I think that the very first step needs to be to like even understand what these biases in the existing data are, which is something that is currently, I'd say, incompletely understood. There's clear evidence that there are things that we are not fully capturing in existing data, but really like quantifying this and then linking it back to other data types to understand what is driving these differences, that would be really critical. And yeah, as AI gets smarter, we will have to keep up with it.
And just a note on our remote chat, Matthew Harris says DDS Hub website is looking impressive and will be a great asset.
Okay, great.
Yes, Rob. Yeah, one more.
Who did that put this together? And if how these would tools in general.
Yeah, so I would say, so for tool development, so there's a number of aspects here. So one observation that came up in the working group is that for some purposes, specialized tools already exist. However, in some cases, if they come out of the publicly funded space, they are not readily accessible because they were developed by someone for some specific purpose, but are not broadly accessible, like technical challenges. There are also cases where specialized tools exist, but they are proprietary in nature, developed out of the commercial space. They would be extremely valuable for, well, if publicly available, but it's essentially like IP issues, commercial interests that prevent that. And yet another thing to think about is applying the same FAIR principles that we want to apply to data, applying those to computational tools and workflows. So I just had a conversation with Alejandro earlier today, right, who would like to containerize many of the FaceBase workflows. And so this would, for example, be an opportunity to make these more broadly available for adoption by others. Like really, when we think about FAIR principles, to think not just data sharing and also think about tool sharing. And then there are, of course, I could go on now about very specific applications where that people want to see, like in the genomic analysis, the visualization space, but that would probably take another half hour, which I'm sure Chris would not like to see.
Exactly. Great. So we're going to move on, but quickly, we had just some more comments in the chat. Jennifer Webster mentions that opportunities for catching AI bias are available through SCHARE. I'm not sure how that's supposed to be pronounced, but it's an NIMHD collaboration.
Yeah.
And it's linked to the DDS Hub.
Yeah, I actually had that on my, I forgot to mention it, but it was actually, let's see if I can me share this quickly. It was actually on my here, just so people can see it spelled out. Yeah, it was right here. I'm not sure if you're pronounced if it's pronounced share or scare.
Right.
Which is
or share.
Yes,
Okay,
but yeah,
great.
I didn't mention it explicitly.
Well, thank you, Axel.
Okay.